approach each other. They never touch, but they become infinitely closer to each other over an infinite axis. And so they would say things like, "But it has an infinite volume, but a finite surface area." What was it? No, it has a finite volume, but an infinite surface. I'm low on mercy inside. Show me the secrets I plead. Just put the weight of the world on me, 'cause I got the will to believe. And I'm looking for mercy. Have you seen her? With diamonds in the sky, between the days we'll never die. So come and fade into the sun. Let me believe that I am the so wide awake but not moving forward. My eyes got something to say. I'm in the shame and I'm breathing shallow. Good, I'm high anyway. And I'm looking for mercy. Have you seen her? With diamonds in the sky, between the days we'll never die. So come and fade into the sun. Let me believe that I am the Can't see the future, I'm walking backwards. There's no dead ends if you fly. I ain't looking for nothing, but have you seen her? With diamonds in the sky, between the days we'll never die. So come and fade into the sun. Help me believe that I am the one. With diamonds in the sky,
guessed it could go all night if the floods will float into the light. I am holding everything I am. In the dark, with Cadillacs and stars, and you're riding on the handlebar. A flash, never to return. Yes, somehow the embers, they still burn. But not like you. The day's cold, it will soon warm up.
Appreciate your willingness to hang on. We have a few topics that we haven't run through quite yet, but in the interest of pandering to the current audience, the predominance of which, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I guess if we count you as not an adoptee of the Smiths, well, we're out. This clan is now the dominant power in Solid Ground. So it's important to pander to the Smith clan. That's exactly right. A special one over there. Like, it is. You're part of Team Smith, obviously. Yeah. That's actually where I get the next topic group. If that knucklehead would have just answered this question. Okay, so we have a few bigger ones that we're going to hit next time. We go over this one occasionally. I'd say we hit the topic of free will maybe once a year at a minimum in here. And although some of it, for those that have been here a long time, feels repetitive, there's always new stuff and new angles to the questions. It seems like it's worthwhile. And the fact that it keeps coming up also indicates that it's a key issue that unless you have a 100% convincing grasp of a particular viewpoint that you find compelling, you're always going to keep asking that question. In fact, we see public intellectuals of the highest order continuing to ask, struggle with, et cetera, on both sides, not just the secular side, but the Christian side as well. So it's a rich topic, and we'll continue into it. And of course, bound up in that topic is sin nature, why does it matter, et cetera. So what I did want to do, we'll go and hit several of these, probably free will, and so we'll hold up a model for these things and why it matters next time. And part of it comes, this every thought captive concept is going to be very much what I think is a good way to think of it will be a deliverance of that discussion. So having the discussion on basically what is the mind of man in relation to God, and then what does it mean to take every thought captive? Because in order to answer that question, you kind of have to know, what is it that are my own thoughts? From whence do they come? What am I supposed to do with them? What are my responsibilities there? All those can't be answered if you believe in God without some sort of relational theory of how this goes with God as well. So free will and God's will is kind of the foundation of this discussion. This is an implication of what model you believe in, why it matters. Obviously, you have to know those two in order to know why it matters, and then this becomes a practical, taking every thought captive becomes a practical outworking of it for the accomplishment of a particular goal.
So real quick, I've had the joy of, I say joy in an ironic and yet meaningful way, of counseling, in particular, 3 people that I work with through really intense marriage difficulties.
Okay.
And I found that, and I found this to be this nouveau reformed resurgence, right?
Yes.
We had this kind of in the early 2000s all the way up until now, where you grew beards and read Spurgeon and told people that you were like a 12-point Calvinist and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I found from it that I've been seeing recurring over and over is determinism in belief on daily actions. So I'm working with a guy right now whose father was a terrible alcoholic. And he is telling me I'm going to end up just like my father. And I know human beings say things like that, right?
Yes.
But he almost has a theological implication to it that I appreciate about this class, kind of opening that up and going, no, you are your choices. Like,
right.
Go make some.
It's not, if you feel that you can't resist it,
right,
perhaps you won't resist it. Yes, that's right. Well, that's a terrific segue into the topic, which was your suggestion anyway, so you ought to have a good segue into the topic. I'll take what I think is the core of Kevin's question he asked in response to our, give us some more topics. He basically asked the question of how our minds changed. He went on to basically ask the question that he's gone through himself, which is very interesting in that Kevin has gone from having been an atheist to being a Christian And he's asking the question, how do you change minds? Or how does one change one's mind? So it's a terribly interesting, and I don't, Kevin has the courage to ask the question. We all wonder, how is it that we went about going from thinking A to thinking B, or thinking not A, or whatever it is that we have changed our minds to? How did we change our mind? What really happened there? Did I get suckered? Did I just go with the flow? Was it predetermined that I would do so and it was destiny and irresistible? How is it that this works? So as we intend to try to explore this topic enough today to either answer the question or give us the tools that we need to answer the question. Obviously, we'll talk about two terms here, to change and the mind. And for the sake of this class, we'll simplify both of those, distill them down to what is essential traits of each one so that we don't have to be too worried about interactions that are higher order interactions. Change is something that I'm fascinated by, absolutely fascinated by. I think the nature of time reduces to change. I think that the physical world can only be differentiated with respect to change from one segment of the physical world to another. That everything that we do is comparative. When we say things like, this guy ran 60 meters in, how fast does Usain Bolt run? He ran 100 meters in 9 seconds or something like that.
Close to 9.
So we've got, Bolt running from this point right here, and he goes the distance of 100 meters, and the time that he does it is in 9 seconds, let's say. And what we mean by 9 seconds, 9 point something. And let's say here's a stopwatch.
That's a pretty
Okay.
good lick.
What do we got? Google over there? Google knows more than we do, that is true. 9.58 seconds. So what we mean by this is, here in our clock, he moved, it should be a little bit that way of it. He moved from this point to this point comparatively as this hand moved from this point to this point. So we really are just comparing motion from one thing to another. We are taking one part of the physical world and we're comparing it to another part of the physical world, and it doesn't matter how you define time, it's all this way. Is it the distance that light travels in that same amount, at that same relational point? Is it how many times this atom cycles or oscillates? It's all motion. It's a comparison of motion in the physical world to motion in the physical world in this. And just that question to me is interesting enough to ask, what is the physical world? Now, I tell you, this is maybe deeper than you had hoped, but this is something I've been thinking on for a very long time. What you wanted to hear? Oh, good grief. All right, well, stand by and hold on to your hats. I think that the physical world is God's instantiation of the best way to have minds, which are immaterial, show thoughts. Now, why show thoughts? The thoughts are important, but ultimately the thoughts speak to intent. So when we talk a lot of times in Christianese about the heart and the mind, the heart and the mind. We don't really think that the heart contains some immaterial construct that's distinct from the mind. What we really mean is, when we say heart and mind, we mean what do we want versus what do we think, and then what do we will, where will means choose, or what do we choose. So anybody who's ever gone on a diet understands this one. I want to be thinner than I am now, or I want to be bulkier than I am now. And so I think that in order to gain additional weight while losing body fat, I need to eat more protein and eat less, whatever it is this week. So this is what I want, this is what I think, and what I choose does not always match up with what I think and what I say I want. Now, some people will turn around and say, well, the reason that you willed this was that you wanted to eat your favorite food more than you wanted to lose weight or to gain muscle or to whatever it is you want to do. Is that the case? Because we can say that that's not the case easily by just talking about it over time, over time. One of the things that is a key indicator of maturity, maybe you can say, some people say intelligence, is they test kids by giving the marshmallow test. Have you heard the marshmallow test? Here's a marshmallow kid. Do you like marshmallows? I like marshmallows. Here's a marshmallow. Now, don't eat that marshmallow for, I forget the amount of time, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is. And at the end of the 2 minutes, I'll give you another marshmallow and you'll have 2. However, if you choose to eat it before then you get no other marshmallow. That's the only one you get. And I can only think of one crueler experiment to children, but you watch some kids who just ignore it and they go about their business. You see some kids who stare at it the whole time, and they fidget and they're dying. And some of them are just like, and they grab it and shove it in their mouth, and they can't stop.
That's my kid. He knows that 2 marshmallows are bad for you. Might as well eat this one.
That's right. He's doing it for his health. So the ability to delay instant gratification for what you perceive of as greater eventual benefit, the fact that the kid's in conflict means that he wants both. He wants both. And it's not that one is stronger than another. In fact, if you turn around and say, let's just graph, which is greater, his desire, here's desire and time. His desire for this marshmallow, is it at this level or is it at this level? Well, and let's say, well, here's the higher one is the desire for immediate gratification, and the other one is more marshmallows. And so if immediate gratification is greater than more marshmallows, or maybe immediate gratification starts here and it just ramps up over time, and 2 marshmallows are here, and if he goes long enough that he crosses this point, it's just going to happen. This is really just a function, and he's going to eat that marshmallow when those 2 things cross each other. That's great right up until, how do you extend that time? It's a really easy way to extend that time with a kid. Put a squirrel in the room. And I use the word squirrel intentionally because it also distracts both me and my wife. If you put a squirrel in the room, then his focus goes off of immediate gratification. His desire for immediate gratification basically goes down because something else is eating up his attention span, so to speak. And 10 minutes could have expired, and you're like, hey, here you go, here's your other marshmallow. And he's like, oh, another marshmallow. I was sorry, I was playing with the squirrel. So it's not that his desire decreased, was it? It's not that
The squirrel's going to eat the marshmallow. I'm back to eat it now.
I shouldn't use squirrel. Some other toy then that is unlikely to consume the marshmallows. You put a toy in the room that the kid wants to play with. He might play with that toy for half an hour.
Sounds like though Jesus saying, focus on the kingdom, and all these things will be granted to you, right?
Stop jumping so far ahead. Yes, there is something to this, which is, and I mean, he's hit the nail on the head. Do not become a determinist about your will, because trivial experiments in distraction should show you that these are not fixed numbers that just compete in the wild. You can, in fact, you can distract yourself. Do we not do this all the time? Do we not do this all the time? I will not walk past this restaurant because if I walk within range of this restaurant, I'm going to go in there. The Christian comedian of whom I'm only a quarter fan, Tim Hawkins, talks about his desire. He goes to Chick-fil-A and he's like, I'm going to order the Chick-fil-A salad. I'm going to order the Chick-fil-A salad. I'm going to order the Chick-fil-A salad. Sir, how can I help you? Like a number 1 with sweet tea, and it just, it's an instant, like, if I'm there, then I know I will do this.
This is true.
Yes.
I just finished reading that book by Charles Duhigg on habits, and a very interesting book. But I was at a restaurant and I ordered a salad, and the waitress asked me to repeat myself, and in that amount of time, I ordered a burger. It was like, and he talks about how like the habits.
And she's like, yes, 12th one today.
She's like, my boss told me to ask him to repeat it when they order a salad. It works every time.
It's like magic.
Satan rang a bell.
Did you really see that?
No.
Okay.
But she probably thought it. It is the case that these are not fixed numbers that are in competition. You can change this. So here's my thesis for you today. I've phrased it in a way that I hope you find interesting and at least compelling for listening to why this is the case.
And I think your argument on this is really mature, by the way.
Well, thank you.
I'm writing some of it down.
If you have a graph of the argument over time, hopefully it doesn't do this. If you want to know how how to choose something or why you choose something, it entirely depends on where you sit down. And that works specifically in the Western world today. But where you choose with your body to physically sit is how you change your mind. Now let me explain what I mean by that. In the, I'll use two examples that I have used in the past, one of them within the last 2 minutes, one of them over the last couple of years with the youth when I worked with them back in high school days. If you know that if you sit down in Chick-fil-A, you will break your, in America, we sit more than we stand. And most of the time, any time that we're standing, we've already chosen to do something. I'm standing because I'm at work and I'm going to do these following things. I'm running from this point to that point, and I'm certainly not going to stop to do something else. But most of the time we sit, and we choose to sit somewhere. In fact, you're choosing to sit here for over an hour. That's a non-trivial investment in time. You have chosen to sit here for a reason. You didn't come here and for different reasons. So the reason that people, even at this table, have chosen to sit here are wildly different. One, because they have said, I wish to oppose stuff that I think is untrue to the maximum degree possible in the place where people believe it the most. Other people have said, this is stuff that I want to believe, and I'm looking for somebody to justify it intellectually. Other people have said, I genuinely have a question about this, let's go see if we fight it out. The number of people who are in that middle camp of, I'm completely open-minded, I'm open to either side, may be less than we expect. In fact, it might be close to zero. We all tend in one direction or another already. Why we tend, I'll answer in a minute. But ultimately, you've chosen to sit here for a reason, and the very act of choosing to do so starts to change your mind. So I'd point to the gentleman that was here who knows whether I've done good or ill. I mean, I only say things in here that I believe are true, that I've prayed about, that kind of stuff. But over 3 weeks ago was a guy who, up till now, said, I believe that this is the nature of the afterlife. And after listening to you, I think I've changed my mind to this, to the point where he was arguing for the new viewpoint in this very class. So that does not happen unless you choose to put yourself here. And then it doesn't further happen unless you choose to do something, subserviate in some sense, your will to someone else's. Bonnie and I were talking this morning about an objection that I had in my academic upbringing was a teacher who would say things, when I would ask a question, why is this the case? Why is this foundational property this way? If their answer was not compelling, I would automatically say to myself, I don't know that I trust this person to teach me what it is that they're purporting to be expert in. And I had an English instructor at college who basically said, you could be a really good writer if you basically did what I tell you to do. To which my question was, I didn't ask him this because I wasn't quite this rude at the time, but like, who are you? So, if you want to become you think an ancient or medieval trait of, I want to be a blacksmith, who you pick to be your master will very much inform how good a blacksmith you're going to be. And the same is true of a tailor, or the same is true of a knight, the same is true of anything. Whomever you make the master, this is, Jesus said it, no student is greater than his teacher. So what he means by that is, what he may mean by that is we'll leave open, but one of the concepts there is the master can only transmit to you as much knowledge as they have. And that's all you're going to learn from them. So if you're going to learn something beyond that, you either need a new master or you have to somehow come up with it on your own. And that come up with it on your own thing, we'll talk about it another time, but there's not a lot of that going on, and it may be that there isn't any of that out there to some degree. Okay, so the other it matters where you sit thing is young men would ask me, why am I struggling with viewing stuff online that I don't want to? Or why am I struggling with my girlfriend? And my answer was, it matters where you sit. So if you know that's something you struggle with and your family leaves the house and you go and sit in your room where you have unfettered, unmonitored internet access, you are already making a choice. What you're saying is, I choose to be subjected to this temptation. You can argue whether that means I choose to actually do this or not. The rules I would give guys for dating girls sound draconian and ridiculous. but I said things like, when you park your car, you have 10 seconds from the time you shut the engine off to the time you get out the door, and no more. Anything longer than that, and you're basically saying, I don't care. You never cross a threshold with a girl into either your house, her house, or somebody else's without either there being a party, function, whatever there's going to have lots of people, or something like that.
It changes your perspective like that.
Yes, it's exactly right.
Attest to that.
And so this we can all attest to it if we think about it. I think to a great degree that I have said in the past the Matrix moment of where he sits with the Neo sits with the Oracle, and she says candy, and he says, "Don't you already know if I'm going to take it?" And she says, "I wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't." And he goes, "Then how can I make a choice?" And her answer was almost right. She says, "Because you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made the choice. You're here to understand why you made the choice." Now that's a Hindu approach to this problem. The Christian answer to this problem is this: you have a master. You have chosen who your master is. You're either following the orders of the master who says you will eat this, or you're following the orders of the master who says you won't. Now this was a little bit of a harder question because it was a non-moral question. Do I want to eat this piece of candy or not? But if she had sat there and said, I want you to, or the architect's question, walk through this door, kill all of humanity but save Trinity, walk through that door, Trinity dies, and we'll remake, what was the name of Zion? We'll remake Zion for you. That's a moral choice that he's making. And he could have said at that point, don't you already know? I mean, the oracle was there. Ostensibly, the oracle's talking to the architect. He's already made the choice. The same candy question is true in the architect's room there. And that's the point. The whole point is he had already made his choice before he walked in the room. In fact, the architect says, I see in your mind the chemical reaction coming up that has to do with an onset of an emotion that is the precursor to you doing something that is not logical. You're choosing to do something illogical in this case. The architect was wrong. He wasn't doing something illogical. And by the way, I don't think any human being does things that are truly illogical. I don't think that they can outline the logic by which they do them. But all people make choices for reasons. Neo made his choice, let's say in this art, because he loved her more than he loved all the rest of humanity, or he loved her and he believed that this system was something that he could defeat, or whatever else it was. But it wasn't an illogical choice. It's only illogical in the framework of the architect who believed it was either A or B. Neo may have thought it was a false dichotomy, or he may have said, I value A more than you value A. You value B greater, I value A greater. So it was a values question there. And in many ways, every choice that we make, including where we sit, is a values question. Here's the example of it today. What other things could you be doing today, right now, at this hour, than sitting in here and listening to this drivel? I mean, there are a million things you could be doing, some of them which you probably enjoy more. But you have chosen to sit here for a reason. Where you sit influences what decisions you make and what your will decides.
When Dennis and I talk, or lots of folks talk, and they say, well, this faith stuff is ridiculous. This is the experiential knowledge of if I obey, I've seen things happen that shouldn't happen, right? Like, if you could say, like, hey, if I obey what God tells me to, then there's no way that, you don't lose your job or whatever.
Right.
And so, if you're Daniel, if I obey God,
I'm getting eaten by the lions.
right? There's no chance. And I've seen over and over again where God blesses people who obey Him. I've seen also where, if you're going to go with Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, where they say, yeah, no, like he will save us, but even if He doesn't, we're not going to do it.
We're not going to do it, right. Those are guys who have made a choice despite significant compulsion to the other degree, and to the point of why it matters on where they sit, where they choose to sit, and also where they have sat before. So it is the case that a lot of what we think has to do with where we have been, our path up to this point. So,
to your point there too,
yes.
with the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you think about all the political power they had, right? Not just their lives, but like And then also sitting around, they're looking at probably a bunch of other Jews who are actually bowing down.
Right.
And they're going, but the three of them are together.
Yes.
And so maybe one of them gets up to kind of bow, and then looks over and is like, oh, yeah.
The other guy's like, well, dude, what are you doing?
You're not doing it either.
So, yes, sir, Steve.
Are you distinguishing between relative truth and absolute truth?
Yes, so when it is the case, I should clarify, because I have talked about how things in this world are happening in a relative sense. What did I do? Oh yeah, this motion related to that motion. Is this true relative to that being true? Absolute truth, so what is absolutely true here is Usain Bolt moved from one point to another. And what's also absolutely true is that this clock hand moved from one point to another. I'm not saying that they're relatively true. What I'm saying is those are both absolutely true. That understand that we place a relation on these two things. And what we say is this hand moved at the same time that this motion happened as well. That claim, one of the reasons relativity theory was such a big deal, both in the scientific world, but more so in the rest of the world, was that it seemed like a scientific affirmation that truth itself is relative. And in fact, this is where the initial portions of quantum mechanics came out, of things like if there's not an observer there to see it, then the waveforms will not collapse. And it's true that Schrodinger's cat is both alive and dead at the same time. That's the active observation that changes that into something being true. That human beings,
Captain Boxer.
yes, that human beings make truth by observing, that human beings define truth, that truth is defined by where you are in what reference frame.
Which ultimately is assumptive truth.
Well, and ultimately, when you turn around and you say, is that correct? And you say, that's correct if you're only talking about one portion of the universe compared to another portion of the universe, compared to another portion of the universe, compared to another portion of the universe. When you stop comparing portions of the universe, and instead you consider the universe as a whole, it turns out that there is an absolute time. That there is, or at least there's a bound to time of what's the maximum amount of time that has progressed versus what's the minimum amount of time that has progressed. And you can always take the maximum amount of time as the leading edge. And the leading edge is absolutely the case. So even relativity theory fails to say that reality is not absolute. When people tell you things like, there's a popular book out there when someone says, it's trying to make a point because of high speeds, when someone says, it's been 1,000 years, and the physicist asks, from whose viewpoint? And what he means there is like where in the universe you stand matters. If you're close to, a supermassive black hole, time's ticking more slowly. If you're out in the most remote regions of intergalactic space, then time ticks much faster. So when they say things, when physicists tell you things, cosmologists say things like the universe is 13.77 billion years old, they're talking about that longest possible timeline. So if relativity theory is true, how can you even answer the question, how old is the universe? Because the answer is for whom? And what they are basically saying is for the universe itself, based on how fast the clocks tick at the fastest point, that's how fast the fastest clocks have ticked.
It should also be understood that when matter is under duress of gravity, it lacks the ability to coalesce in a memorial pattern. And so basically there's no ability for matter to observe in those fashions. So I mean, it's like totally locked into explicit rules of kinematic and dynamical systems within those regions of space.
And let's say, I will leave aside my objection to matter being under duress, because I want to say that what you're terming duress is enough of the natural state that matter would not exist unless it were under forces that caused it to coalesce in the first place.
Right, but they only coalesce as forces weaken on it. So I mean, like if we're going to look at like, if we're going, well, they will coalesce to a singularity if you have large, right? But what I'm talking about is in terms of like complex systems,
yes,
being able
right.
to have kind of the freedom to, like when people say that Mother Nature is intelligent and things like that, and all all this stuff, is like, those types of systems only have the ability to play
Right.
in weak force fields.
Yeah.
Not all systems can interact with other systems, and that's what that proves.
Well, and that ultimately, if I understand your point correctly, it's that maybe you aren't directly referring to entropy, but the idea being that without the ability to maneuver, decay, and not conform to a rigid system, that is what allows change to occur, beauty to occur, symmetries to form, all these kinds of things. So.
So I'm saying is like, if there's a larger pattern to be seen by the physical reality of the world, it's that in the context of greater freedom,
Yes.
you have more complex opportunities for creation.
So on this point and on the point simultaneously about the entire universe, let's think about that one. Back to the question of change, because Kevin's ultimate question was, how do we change? And I have said we change by where we choose to sit, and that has to do with where we locate ourselves in the universe. And I've said that the universe is an arena that God uses to let us see what our wills do when we choose certain things. So this whole thing was ordered in some ways by God, but was it ordered exactly how he wanted it to? No. If you take Genesis and you look at the verse that says, and he put man in charge of it basically and told him to order the world in some way. He wants man to dominate the planet and basically organize it. So it was God basically saying, I have made a world here that is not organized completely according to what I think is ideal. You guys are in charge of doing it. And the whole Garden of Eden thing was, do you want to follow my instructions to organize the world, or do you want to do it yourself? And we were like, we'll do it ourselves, and this is what we get. And God doesn't turn around and be like, well, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a perfect world. The whole reason that he lets the world be here, that he lets us change things, that he lets us maneuver ourselves and change things in it, is to prove to us that his way of doing things is better than our way of doing things, so that by the time that we're all done with this, when we get to the real world and he's like, okay, we're going to do this again, who are you going to listen to? We're like, yep, we've tried it our way, let's now do it your way. This is what matters. This is what matters. So where do we go to sit? I see one last second, Dennis, and then two. Where do we choose to sit? Now we'll say that there are, spiritually speaking, kind of two kingdoms. There's the kingdom of this world, and there's the kingdom of heaven. And when we set our minds on the things above, we are participating in the kingdom of heaven. And when we have access to the kingdom of heaven and the great mind that is in it, who is the organizing principle, not an organizing principle, but who lays down the organizing principles of what is ideal, we can then carry back into this world the organizing principles of the kingdom of heaven, and then we build our own enclaves of the kingdom. I refer you to Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar dreams of this statue on a gold head, silver chest, bronze belly and thighs, and lower legs and feet are clay and iron. Babylon, Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, Romans. What brings down the statue? A piece of rock breaks off from the mountain. A piece of rock breaks off from the mountain and rolls down the hill and destroys the kingdoms. And then what does it do? It grows and fills the whole world. The kingdom of heaven is supposed to be an expanding circumference that eventually, if we choose to do things if we choose to go back to what God has asked us to do, this world could be reordered in God's way. It seems that the predictions that God makes are not going to allow that to happen. What he's going to say is, you guys are going to continue to mess this up. I'm going to wipe it out and we'll start over. But I'm going to start over with those of you who were trying to do this in the meantime. This is the secret of life, the universe, and everything in 30 minutes.
Awesome. See?
Great question. Now here's Dennis's question, and then one last short soliloquy on change.
I just wanted to make an observation about Schrodinger's cat
Yes, sir.
experiment. There was a thought experiment this guy dreamed up that instead of a human being or somebody conscious opening the box and finding out if the cat is dead or alive, you could program a robot to come in from some other room, blind, does not record what it sees or anything, but it's instructed to go to the box and open it and not report back what happens. Now, when the robot does that and open the box, if the cat is alive, it's going to leave.
Right.
It's going to leave the box, and if it's dead, it's going to be dead. So that sort of throws like a monkey wrench into the whole thing, because
Yeah, there's two issues with that one.
No consciousness observes it. It is just opened by an unconscious, blind, artificial thing.
Right. So there are two quick issues with this one, because I know not everybody in here to discuss quantum mechanics or cats. One, it's almost certainly not the case that the cat will leave the box if it's open, because there's a guiding principle that includes both cats and boxes, which is, as everyone knows who has a cat, if it sits, I fits. If it fits, I sits. So any box that a cat can get in, he will get in and will stay in, usually curling up for a little while. This is a joke. Also, quantum mechanics now has kind of come to the point where they think of particles as observers. So while it started with this kind of Copenhagen-esque interpretation that Schrödinger says, by the way, Schrödinger's cat was intended to say, this is ridiculous, this can't be the case. But it somehow got adopted for, nope, that's how it is. Which again, people don't believe anymore at the kind of PhD level in physics. The observers now can be particles. So another particle, by interacting with that particle, creates an interaction or an observation. So it is the case they started out with the term observers. Now physics has, as I understand it, gotten to the point where they talk about interactions as these observational things. Because remember, even in some of these guys' minds who were not dualist, which was most of them, or many of them at the time, they didn't think that these consciousness-bearing systems were important, because they thought that we might be deterministic. You know, Einstein was against punishing people of a certain type of criminal, because he was basically saying these are deterministic processes that lead them to do this. Why are we holding them responsible for something that they can't choose?
There are particles inside that box before it's ever open.
Right, so that box was a good illustration as far as it goes, but now it's kind of matured to the point where they talk about there are interactions that cause these things to collapse.
Yeah, that's one thing is like, that's one theory.
Yes, sir, right. But I don't buy that, by the way. I agree with you.
In field theory, I mean, it depends on your perspective, right? I mean, like, are you operating in a discrete context or a continuous context? Because in a continuous context, the assumption is that out to infinity, if I'm not at infinity, then I'm still interacting with that particle on a micro level that's almost insignificant to our ability to engineer anything out of that.
Yes.
But if you were an infinite observer, you would pick up that signal. So it's like, but if there's a discrete measure between the two, then there's a point at which we can define a very, very large distance as infinity,
yes,
and there will be no further interaction. But we have no ability to pick up those micro signals, so it looks to us as if there will be no interaction at a certain very, very large distance, but we have no idea whether or not they still are interacting.
Yeah, you
So
allude to...
I could be inside or outside of that box and still be interacting with what's inside of it.
Exactly, and you allude to 2 points that I think point to foundational flaws in the way that both QFT and quantum chromodynamics are based on. One of which is this idea of observers and interactions, that when you turn around and you take it down to its core, you might say things like, these don't even make sense to us in a regime prior to the coalescence of matter, and that in that regime prior, you still see expansion, i.e. change, without matter. And if there's change, and someone will say, well, see, time doesn't have any meaning there. It does have a meaning to me, which is if there was something here, and then there's something here, and then there's something here, and then there's something here, from a radius perspective, you can't tell me that that's not a physical change. So even though the matter's not involved, if it's just space, the quantum dynamicist shrugs his shoulders at this point and says, well, time is not well understood at that point. Not well understood for you because of how you have lashed it inextricably to this system that is, to me, intellectually corrupt. So this is one of the main foundational reasons that I don't buy quantum mechanics in its current form. Now, discrete versus continuous, I have a different answer for, which is there is only one discrete thing one continuous thing, that is to say the universe. It is simultaneously discrete and continuous. And what I mean by that is, if it is of a certain size, and there is no portion from this edge of the universe to that edge of the universe where there is not universe there. That if you elected to put a point there and you said, is this point contained in the universe, or does this point touch the universe? The answer is yes, at all points there. You may say it's meaningless to say there's no point out here, but if you wanted to metaphysically put a point outside and say, is the universe contained here? The answer would be no. If that's true, the only Hamiltonian that matters is the Hamiltonian that contains the entirety of the universe. And if you talk about energy states, if you talk about Hamiltonian operators that do not operate in some sense on the entire universe, you are already punting on reality and saying, I have to be stuck here. So more for discussion later. We can do seminar-like stuff on this one. But for those of us that are like, what on earth did I walk in here for? Let me go back to change and finish my last soliloquy on change, and then let's have some discussion, because there's been too much talk on my side. Will. Thank you, sir. I want to do, so when you change who you are, how did I go from being a Christian to being an atheist, to being a Catholic to being an atheist to be a Christian, or a semi-Catholic to being an atheist to being a Christian? Oftentimes, so it's the case that you were Catholic. Why? And if you had to say, I'm going to ask you questions, just say really quick. Right.
Parents were.
So on the seat model, this has to do with who made me sit in a seat. So my parents made me sit in the pew, on the kneeling bench, wherever else. I was forced to sit there. At some point, and we see this in our children, we see this in ourselves, we quote unquote start to think for ourselves.
And even beyond this, in that process of thinking for myself, I combine the humanism of the public schools with some of the illogical things that nobody could really
Yeah, it's
explain
totally
to me. Right?
illogical in public
So,
school.
like Chesterton said, the humanist has his feet firmly planted in midair.
Yes.
This was this kind of, you should do good things, and I was like, why? And they were like, no, just do them.
Yeah. It's important to do good things. That's why.
I'm not going to do that.
Now, there's an objection that some of you are probably already thinking to this, if you're thinking far enough ahead on this one, but people have asked before, which is, if it's the case, Scott, that what you're saying is true, that what we think depends on where we come from, then why is anybody blamed for anything, ever? That is to say, why blame the Hindu for being Hindu? Why blame the Catholic for being Catholic? Why blame the Christian for being Christian? It just has to do with where they sit. That's where they start. Here's the important thing. Your world rarely contains just Hinduism, just Christianity, just Catholicism, just atheism. You will, in the course of this light, bump up into the others, and you will watch this comparison happen. And here's this intersection that these two systems have, where if system H, I shouldn't have colored it in now because it's going to be harder to see this, so I'll redraw them again over here. There's going to be some part of it where the intersection, and let's call this, for the sake of argument, we'll call this truth. Catholicism, humanism, and truth. There may be things that are true about Catholicism. There may be things that are both true and are Hindu beliefs. There may be things that are true that are both Catholic and Hindu beliefs. So there are shared values, ideas, whatever in those two, and some of those might also happen to be truth. The human being is really, really good at drawing these kinds of intersection circles. In fact, when we try to teach logic at the base level, this is how we do it. We start with Venn diagrams and we talk about intersection and union and all that kind of stuff, because everyone can do this. Everyone. IQ 80 can draw circles and say, this is in the circle, this is out of the circle. This can be done by everyone. You got to be a rocket scientist to do this. We, human beings, bump up against this, and whether we can articulate it or not, we get a sense for what is true. And it is the case that there are things, and let's say that this just stood for Christianity instead of Catholicism, let's say Christianity as a whole, in which case it ought to be overlapped entirely with truth, right? It's the case that when someone says to you, there are things that Hinduism doesn't contain anything that's true. But you see that there are things that are in Hinduism that you're like, but that seems true to me. Just because the Hindu claims this is part of the Hindu religion does not mean that they get to take it out of the basket of truth. So when people say things like, Catholicism is completely bankrupt and it's the religion of the devil. Well, Protestant, news to you, 80% of what Catholicism believes, you believe too. We make the other 20% really big, but there's a lot of overlap there. And in fact, you might want to make numbers up, like, I'll make up a number, 50% of what the Hindus believe are the same that Christians believe. And I don't mean in who the gods are or how that stuff works, but notice what their virtues are. The list of virtues in Hinduism does not diverge greatly from the list of virtues in Christianity. And I don't mean that just if virtues are the same, then the religions are the same. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, when you stop looking at monkey gods and elephant gods, and you say, what are the core things that Hinduism tells you to do? A lot of that is the same core things that Christianity tells you to do. The difference, the major difference in my mind of Christianity, I've said this before, of Christianity and every other world religion is, every other world religion requires you to do certain things in order to get into heaven. Christianity, thank God, is the only one that says, you're not going to make it, and I'm going to give it to you. And that turns around and ought to inspire you to try even harder and better. And if it doesn't, then you didn't believe it in the first place. But at the end of the day, Christianity says it is grace, not works, that does it. Now, the works are the evidence of the grace, but the grace is the logically prior.
We've got to address Dennis's posture here.
His facial expression.
So we're talking about Christianity and it's at what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I was just reading through something. We attended an Anglican church, and the guy wrote this whole thing of what Anglicanism is, and he said Anglicanism, when it's at its best, is X, and went down the line. And I have to say, the context in which we've experienced Christianity can be a very can change what we're talking. The terms here can be changed, right? If your experience of Christianity, and this is why you say truth doesn't overlap completely with Christianity.
Yeah. So when I say Christianity, this when the Anglican says Christianity as it ought to be, what he's really saying is this: all of Christianity ought to fit in this intersection right here. That is to say, it ought to be a circle of a certain size in truth. Why should Christianity not comprise all of truth? Because ultimately there are things that don't have to do with a religion that are true. Is it a part of a religion to say a particle moves from point A to point B in a certain way? That doesn't sound like a religious assertion. So I'm okay leaving that outside of a system of doctrine that we call Christianity. So there's a whole bunch of truth out there that is not truth about God. It might be truth about the universe. It might be truth about your hair color. It is the case that your hair color in the universe might have been created so by God in some way, either directly or indirectly, but at the end of the day, it's not a specifically religious belief. So the bottom line is, the reason I'm all nuts about the tiles and minimizing Christianity is, forget about this. Focus on this. This is the part that matters, and when you find something that lies in this intersection, hold on to it and work your truth based out of there. But you better be really sure that you're at that intersection of those two circles. I saw a hand over here. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, would you believe that most, or basically all religions are displaying the fact that God's way is right and our way is wrong?
Yeah, I do think that's the case. In fact, I won't do it. I'll let Paul do it. So Paul says it in a couple of spots, and I actually forget who's the author of this one. It was either Jesus or Paul who says it, but ultimately we'll say the Holy Spirit. That the reason the nations are out there with the bounds that they have is so that by groping they might find God. Yes. Yes, thank you very much. And then you also have the same concepts laid out elsewhere that says, where Paul's talking about when the Gentiles, by some sort of intuition, follow the dictates of the law, they show that they're a law to themselves. So and he says on the Areopagus, God is not far from any of us. He wants us to reach out and find him there. So can God be found in the middle of India? Yes, he can be. Is he going to be found in the form of Hanuman? No. But are there clues about how people worship Hanuman? Like basically any Hindu could ask the question of like, why am I worshiping a god? And that could lead them to the question of, well, because I believe there's obviously a higher power than me. One of the questions should be like, did we make monkeys into gods, Or did gods make monkeys in their image? That's a legitimate question. And that one has to be answered. And the mockery, the best, most greatest invective in the Old Testament are the prophets poking at the guys that are like, this thing was right here. This guy literally built it, carved it out of wood. Now he's bowing down to it. What a knucklehead. But we all do that to some degree. But I think your point is a good one. Yes, I do think that all of those things exist out there because there are as many paths to God as there are people, but there is only one end. So when I say that, what I mean to say is, and I'll differentiate because I can sense Steve thinking this one. I don't mean that there's not one way. There is one way. There is one gate. There is one way to heaven. There is one way to a relationship with God. But the path that leads you to that gate, there are as many as there are people. There is only one gate to go through. There is only one fold to be in. There's only one endpoint to every journey, but there are many ways to that location. And they all depend on where you start from. So all of this, I mean, it makes kind of geophysical sense, doesn't it? If
that gate, God's going to show mercy on everyone because there's nothing that they could do on earth to get them.
God will have to show mercy on anyone who is not perfect. So if anybody who's perfect can show up to the gate and be like, I belong here because you said this is for perfect people. And if God looks at that person and is like, you are sinless, we already know what he will do. He's already said. They come right in. The problem is anybody sinless? And
But you can't walk up there with blood on your hands. I mean,
well, and I don't mean to be, let me get as selfish as I possibly can. Philosophically, I care about the answer. Practically, I don't care. I'm worried about, for this guy right here, I ain't going to be able to walk up and be like, nope, I'm perfect, let me in. My question's going to be like, you said that that you would forgive me.
There's something by the time you have to realize that your way is wrong. Because like if you're in God's house, like that's like if someone's in your house, you don't want them to be in your house acting like it's their house. Like,
yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, very obvious. In fact, some of one of the most creative and profound and parenting techniques is when the father says to the son, who is, let's say, his strength, or at least capable of working his will to some degree in that house, I want to do X. And the father says, as long as you live under this roof, you may not do that. If you wish to go, because this is actually what God did for us. As long as you're willing to live under this roof, this is how you do it. If you don't want to do that, not because I want to be a tyrant, but because I know that's what's best for ordering in the house and the happiness of the people inside it. These are very good thoughts.
First of all, I didn't know my facial expressions were under such scrutiny.
So much scrutiny, Dennis.
It was the arms.
It was a little hard to miss.
Extended yawn or
I was actually trying to swallow a belch.
I don't know which is worse.
he was trying to be polite.
That's not true. I was reacting to what he said, but talking about intersections,
Yes.
Kevin and I came to intersections, him atheist to Christian and I Christian to atheist. And it's true that where you're born, who your parents are, where you're forced to sit, that's going to influence you hugely. And I was forced to sit in a Southern Baptist church, and I'm not swallowing a belch now. It's what I believed until I intersected with what I considered rational thought, evidence, credible evidence, and I just intersected from this street to this street. And your comment about Christianity being the only religion where you don't have to do anything, you just have to have, it's all by grace or whatever the word is, that's not quite true.
No, I wouldn't say what you just said. If I said it that way, I said it wrongly.
I misunderstood you. But
I probably said it wrongly. What I meant to say was all other religions require a standard of conduct, to my knowledge. Christianity is the only religion that says, yes, there's a standard of conduct. Yes, you're responsible for keeping it. When you fail to keep it, here's how the difference is made up. And here's the way that it was made up. Technically, actually, Islam does this too. Islam says it's only by the mercy of Allah that anyone will make it to heaven. It's not that if you're a perfect Muslim. Even Muhammad was making the argument of nobody's a perfect Muslim.
This is where I get into the struggle with the diagrams and the structures, because it's so impersonal. right?
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between Christianity and other religions is, yes, there's a standard, right? That's the same on all of them. This is the only one where God came down and took the burden upon himself, right?
Yeah, in that sense, yes, that's true.
And there have been thousands of religions that you or nobody have ever heard of that have come and gone.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean to say of the ones I've heard of.
This one is coming and it's going to go, and there's going to be others after this. And so you can't generalize about Christianity as the only religion that does X.
Well, I applaud you for quoting Gamaliel there, who says in the trial of Peter and some of the others of, look, a while ago this guy stood up, said he was somebody, and that all died out. And then this guy stood up and said he was somebody, and that all died out. If this Jesus is one of these guys, don't worry about it. This will extinguish itself over time. But if it's from God, be careful, because you might find yourself fighting against God. So I agree with you. I mean to say, in my limited knowledge, this seems to be the truth. But by the same token, I would point to experiential truth as key indicators of the truth of Christianity as well as its philosophical rigor, at least as you've heard it hopefully addressed in this class, and its adherence to the same propositions that you and we all hold to be true. Okay. Let me clarify one point, lest I be misunderstood. If this is the fold, and there's one gate, what I mean to say is, here's the path, here's the way that leads you there. That's if you start here. If you start over here, you have the most direct path is this way. If you start over here, the most direct path, depending on the speed. So let's say that, by if getting on this makes you go twice as fast towards the kingdom of heaven, then although maybe you could make your way to the kingdom of heaven this way and enter the gate, it's better to go here and make your way in. It may be that you're here. So when I say there are as many paths as there are people, I mean starting positions. And those starting positions, it is not the case that the direct path is always the best. It might be that the most direct path to the way is the best. And that's the way that I think that this works. In fact, in my view, the world works this way. If you want to get to heaven, if you want to be perfect, if you want to live in a world that is flawless, your best place, the best way to get there, if you start off over here, is to make the direct beeline for the kingdom of God in this world, and that the kingdom of God in this world, the path, the way that Christ talks about, leads you to the final kingdom of God.
Where are you going?
Why go through here when you can go through here? Now here's the problem, and Dennis has highlighted it, and then Kevin, your question or comment. This is the true path. This is the kingdom of heaven as it should be. Is our church that? Are we as a fellowship basically an outpost of the kingdom of heaven? If God turned around and said, I'm going to buy whatever Oak Brook Court location this is, and I only want people who are solely dedicated, fully dedicated to operating under the rules in my house in here, acting as a body, so that the lost can come most easily to me. Are we that? Christians? If we are not, we certainly should be, and we're wrong not to. This is what a church should be, so attractive. If you're a church, then go sit in the place that makes it that way.
Scott, I demand that you listen to her because she had a question.
I asked her earlier. She was straightening hair.
So Lewis said there's one path home and 1,000 into the wilderness.
Right. Yes. And that path, and this path is superintended. It is the pavers, the people, the caretakers of this path are the body of Christ. And so if people look at their road and they look over at the road of the body of Christ and they say, that's nice smooth pavement and easy rolling, I want to be over there. If it's all broken and fractured and potholed, they're going to look at their own path and say, mine's just as good as that one. Christians, beware, do not let us be so bad superintendents of the way that people look at us and say, I don't see an advantage of that over what I do. If Christianity is true, our way of executing should be so superior, obviously, to the people on the outside. The signs to the Gentiles, so to speak, in the Pauline language, would be so great that when they see it, they're like, I need to be a part of that. I think there's an example of that sitting in this class right here, which I hold up.
Sorry. So to add to your point, and then a question, clarifying question. So I did not put myself in the seat of hanging out with the Smiths. To their credit, when I was in the seat of hanging out with the Smiths, I was so drawn, not only that, but many other people were so drawn, my parents were so drawn to what they had that was almost, you couldn't even quantify it. You're like, I don't know what it is about them, but man, they're so happy and they have this relationship with Jesus, and it seems like robust and
Crazy people aren't supposed to be this happy.
Right.
People aren't supposed to be this happy.
Right.
What's wrong with them?
Right.
Yes.
So you've got that. So once I was in the seat, you're right. What happened was I was like, wow, I see this, I like it, I want more of it. This is wow. And then as I continued down that road, but how did I get there? And that's the real question to me, and the kind of question that we've asked before is in terms of this God desiring maximally or being maximally salvific. Like I met Bonnie in college before we dated.
Yes.
It took some ordering of events that I met her because we went to my parents' beach house on a spring break, and someone invited her and didn't ask me.
Yes.
And I said, how do you invite somebody to somebody else's house for spring break? And
I remember this specifically because his retort was like, what's the worst she's going to do to your parents' house?
Yeah.
Clean it?
Yeah.
Or whatever it was.
That's exactly what he said. That's the question that I'm asking, is that God obviously interjects into this system sometimes. And you see it in the Old Testament, right? God is like, it's not like he set up a system and he's like, here's this arena, we'll just see how it goes. He goes in a bunch of times and he's like, idiots, you're doing it wrong. And then, changing things up and shaking things up. I shouldn't say it like that because that's not how God is. But
So I refer the honorable gentleman to the comment of some time before, of a few classes back. This is the reason that I think, so you're articulating exactly one of the deliverances of the idea that says this is the greatest possible world. And when that turns into a head scratcher for you, the answer is in not the greatest possible world, Kevin, who could have come to a loving relationship with God and his fellow man, misses it by this much because Bonnie was busy that weekend, or doesn't like the look of his silly face, or whatever it is, that kind of thing. So that's not the world that God doesn't allow that suboptimal world to happen. If it's possible that Kevin intersect this path, God arranges the path in such a way and the people starting points in such a way that they will, at least once in their life and at the key point in their life, intersect that path where they can make the ultimate choice. The ultimate choice. And then here's my last soliloquy on choice, and maybe we'll continue this next time because it actually feeds into the next topic. Every choice you make that is moral, not should I wear this shirt, that shirt, should I eat eggs or yogurt. Every choice that you make that is moral is the question, do I obey my own current desires or do I obey God's desires? There is a fine line dividing the two, and it's always one of those two choices, always. And I will challenge you to think about every moral choice you've made in your life. Find me an exception that does not say where God's is, remember under the Christian definition, is the quote-unquote right thing to do, morally speaking. And that everything on my side is things that are not right, things that I would say are not right, but are still what I would say is good for me. So this is what every choice out there boils down to. God says, do the following things, but I don't want to do that because it seems better for me to do this thing. What's the fallacy in here?
God doesn't know what's good for us.
That there's anything at all that is good for me that is not also right. So it's also the case. So whenever we think this, by the way, what do we believe? A lie. That is a lie. There is nothing, this is where the devil comes in. This circle right here, and there is no intersection between these two circles. This circle right here is entirely predicated on a false belief that there exists a moral choice A, or M, exists a moral choice M, that is not what I would say is right, but is good for me. There is no such thing. And it's hard for us to see because like the marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows later, sometimes we're like, the marshmallow now is the right answer. The true right answer is always best for us in the long run. I saw 3 hands. Yes, sir.
Define need for us, if you could, because need could be context of things that I care about, like my family.
So you're asking me what my desire is in this case. So by me, I simply mean whatever you mean when you say I.
Okay, so it's very individual.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a nice diagram.
Yes, I'll clean it up.
Because in the conversation that, some of the points you were
It
making.
really does, doesn't it? Let's put
You have
it in
a situation
perspective.
here that I think is far simpler than what I can communicate.
Yes.
All right? So
Okay.
if you look at a sonic vibration, any kind of, like if you take a certain kind of material and you induce on that a certain vibration at a frequency, I'm not talking about a tone you hear, but a vibration at
Yeah.
a frequency,
Yeah.
you're going to get a shakeout.
Yep.
If you put one type of material on that, like sand on canvas, for instance, it's going to shake out into a specific pattern based on the sand, the grains of the sand, the size of the sand. Now, if
Yes.
you put hard peas or garbanzo beans on there with sand, they're going to shake out in a different pattern at the same time based on the same frequency and the same material.
Yes.
So what I'm seeing, and what I have seen really for many years, is that is what's happening when God is speaking to us, that we hear the voice of God. Like the gentleman here, and then sometimes the other gentleman that sits there have very resonant voices. Well, that pattern is intriguing. I'm drawn to that. I want to hear that voice. Same with a female voice. I want to hear that. I'm drawn to that. So all the different people listening to the vibration of God, in other words, you want to
Yes.
say it that way.
Yes.
There are other vibrations going on that you might be drawn to, and there's a shakeout. And the path leading to God, in other words, you need to get yourself on the right fabric in order to be shaken out towards God.
So this is a very profound point, and I'll try not to labor the analogy, but it's exactly right, I think. So he makes a circular system that he's going to vibrate, and you piled all this stuff in there, beans and sand and all that stuff. At a certain frequency, resonant frequency, you'll get this sorting, where certain things will sort to the middle, certain things will sort to the outside, and some things may fall off and some things may stay on, but you'll basically get this sorting pattern that goes on. Now that's a deterministic process. And the sorting that happens, by the way, the voice of God, where I think the truest analogy of that one is the day of the Lord. Yeah. On the day of judgment, all of these things will be sorted into, in the agrarian societies, it was the sheep and the goats that God will sort them. But in some way, the voice of God will divide these things up. And whether you're in this circle or that circle depends on where you started and what you're made of. And the good news for us is we get to choose, at the end of the day, what we're made of. And we choose what we're made of by where we choose to sit. And where we choose to sit it has been influenced by where we go, but God has allowed a path for each of us to start from one spot, encounter truth, and either accept and embrace the truth or reject it. And if you accept and embrace the truth, God gives you more truth. This is to he who has, more shall be given. The person who encounters truth and holds on to it is given more truth. And the person who has a little bit of truth but isn't interested in pursuing it, even what he has will be taken from him. This is part of the meaning of that passage. So this is a very interesting way of thinking of it. And I think of the day of judgment of being very much that kind of sorting process. And it matters what you're made of, and it matters where you are. Dennis, and then last comment.
This day of judgment, you make it sound like it's going to be this courtroom, like a courtroom, and God, whoever's going to be sitting up there as a judge. Now, when it's my turn, am I going to be allowed to have a defense counsel?
It's interesting who the defense counselor is and who the prosecutor is. Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens.
Okay. I will bet
Just
you.
wanted to end on a humorous note.
Yes, that's all good.
That's funny. Really?
Seriously, am I going to have a defense counsel?
No.
Well, there's the advocate and there's the accuser.
But you could.
No, that's what I
Absolutely, Jesus is the truth. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean the truth.
You cannot devise your own truth.
Yes, Stephen is telling you that Jesus is the absolute truth.
Yes. Well, let me challenge that, not by saying Jesus is not true or Jesus is not the absolute truth. What I mean to say is, here's a circle in it that says any proposition in here is true. So the statement, Steve is a nice guy. Let's
I don't think you know the truth.
say that again.
I don't think it's possible. It's not possible to know the truth without knowing Jesus.
It's not. Is it possible to know the truth without knowing Jesus? So by the truth, do you mean all truth, or do you mean some truth?
You can devise your own truth within some model, but it's not real.
So the way I understand you to be meaning truth is the way the world really is. If that's what you mean by truth, then of
Relative. And the way that we talk about science
yes.
is all relative. It's all a model.
Science is not.
And you have a model and you find out what the truth of this model is.
Yes.
It's not really the truth.
Oh, I agree with you. And the model, if I think I have been critical of the model-based approach of science for a long time. I think science ought to start with true philosophy, and it ought not build more than it has philosophical foundation to build. So I think we are in violent agreement, Steve. What I mean to say is there may be statements, when I say all truth, Steve is wearing a gray shirt today is a proposition that doesn't seem to have to include Jesus. Now you may object and be like, well, I wouldn't even be here if Jesus had not created the world. Yes, that's true. But the proposition itself, Steve is wearing a gray shirt today, does not include Jesus explicitly anywhere. So insofar as that proposition contains a truth value, it's not, that proposition does not have a reference to Jesus in it anywhere. Now if you're saying, where did all of this come from? My answer to you is going to be, it was created through him and by him and for him. And who's the him? Jesus. And it's going to say, how do I come into greater truth? How do I learn more of the truth? My answer is going to be by proper inquiry into knowledge through the mind of Christ. So I think we're probably in violent agreement, but I'm trying to be...
Yeah, you're on square of opposition, which is good.
Yeah. All right, we're out of time, so last comment, and then we'll continue this next time.
Justin said something to the effect of science should inform philosophy as much as a telephone should inform the caller.
Yes, right. Right.
And this is kind of to the point, right, that scientific truths can tell us certain things about what, but never why. Sometimes about how, but never why.
Yes.
Maybe there isn't a why. It just is.
Why do you say that?
Like there's a why.
Why do you say that?
I say sometimes things, to my point of view, the universe is here.
Yes.
Why it's here is a it doesn't, it's a meaningless question.
So why?
It just is.
Why do you say that?
Because that's my belief.
Because it's your belief.
The evidence that I see says it happened naturally and it just happened. And there was no why to it.
Okay, but I just asked you a why question and you answered it. So you do believe that why questions have meanings?
Don't pull that shit. You're always doing that. That's just...
I apologize for the logic. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much for your attention.
So wide awake. Can't see the future, I'm walking backwards. There's no dead ends if you fly. I ain't looking for nothing, but have you seen her with diamonds in the sky? Between the days, we'll never die.